Come closer now. Let the world outside fade to a murmur. I am here to tell you a story, a soft story for the edge of sleep. You listen to these whispers to find your rest, so allow my voice to be a gentle weight upon your eyes. Before we begin, a small kindness. Like this recording? And subscribe to the quiet place we are building here. Tell me, where in the world are you? And what hour of the night finds you listening? Now, settle in, breathe, and let go. The advertisement for the house was a sweet, impossible song. A colonial treasure in the walled heart of Cartagena, offered for a price that felt like a secret. I should have heard the discord in its melody, but I have always wrapped myself in the thin cloak of disbelief. It is how I have faced a world brimming with beautiful, hollow things, the whispers of the city, of ghosts and spiritual scouring, of addresses that held a quiet sickness. I dismissed them as folklore for tourists, a currency of fear. The house itself was tucked away on a street of stone where the sun cast long skeletal shadows. Its limestone walls were painted a shade of dying sun, a yellow that seemed to swallow the light and give nothing back. The woman from the agency, a creature of nervous energy and the scent of wilting flowers, traced a hurried path through the rooms. Her heels were like tiny, sharp heartbeats against the ceramic tiles, a patterned skin that covered every floor. Those tiles, they would soon become the focus of my world. The first 7 days drifted by in a haze of work. From my small study, I watched the courtyard where a choked fountain stood in a tangle of weeds, their leaves rustling with no help from the wind. The house breathed around me, the soft groans of ancient wood, the sigh of stone settling deeper into the earth. I told myself these were the sounds of time itself, nothing more. My laptop cast a lonely, modern glow in the gloom, a tiny island of reason in a sea of shadows. I was there for 3 months to finish my work on colonial trade, a dry and dusty thing of facts and figures, a world that had no room for specters. The irony of this would not be lost on me, not for long. It was on the 8th day, as the clock breathed out the hour of 3, that the world tilted on its axis. I was tracing the faded ink of shipping logs from a forgotten century when the warmth was stolen from the room. A cold so pure and sudden that my breath plumed before my face like a pale ghost. It was a deep cold, a cold of the bones, of the marrow. But it was not the room that was cold. It was me. As I rose and drifted toward the window, this sphere of perfect winter moved with me, a shroud I did not know I was wearing. And that is when I saw him, a shape gliding across the main room, framed by the study's open door. He was tall, dressed in the dark fabric of another time, a coat that might have been elegant 300 years ago. He moved with a silent purpose, a straight and unwavering line from the entrance toward the kitchens, his gaze fixed on a destination only he could see. His passage made no sound on the ceramic sea of the floor, but with each step, the air around his feet shimmered, a heatless mirage. The cold was his companion, his wake. A sound escaped my lips, not a word, but a small animal noise of surprise. The figure did not break his stride. He simply flowed onward, beyond the edge of the doorframe, and was gone. And just as suddenly the warmth returned to the room, so quickly I felt the sting of it on my skin. I might have convinced myself it was a waking dream, a phantom of a tired mind. But it was what he left behind. My caution dissolved into a need to know. I followed his invisible path across the tiles, and there, where his feet had not touched, the floor was scarred, not with great breaks, but with a fine, intricate web of hairline cracks. They formed patterns that whispered to me from the pages of my research. A stylized compass, a merchant's seal, a faint map of islands scattered like jewels. I knelt, my fingers tracing the new wounds in the ceramic. They were cold, so cold, and the fine dust of the grout between them was damp, a weeping moisture that had no reason to be. The logical part of my mind, my faithful shield, began its work. Old houses shift. Sudden changes in temperature can fracture brittle things. An exhausted eye can conjure patterns from chaos. This is what the brain does. It weaves stories to make sense of the void. But no thread of logic could explain the cold that had worn me like a coat, or the stark, shadowless clarity of the man who had walked through my house. That night, I called my sister. She is in Boston, a city of brick and sensible seasons. I did not tell her what I had seen. The words did not yet exist. To speak of it would be to make it real, to give it weight and form in a world I needed to remain solid. I only wanted to hear her voice, a tether to the life I understood. She said I sounded distant, as if speaking from the bottom of a well. She asked if I was eating, if I was sleeping. Her ordinary love felt like a forgotten treasure. When she asked if I was all right, the truth pushed against my teeth. Almost, I told her. Instead, I said that Cartagena was a dream, and my work was going well. Each word was a perfect, polished lie. Sleep did not come to me that night. It circled, a predator in the darkness. The house was awake. Its quiet sighs were now a language. Beneath the familiar groans of wood and stone, I began to hear other things. The soft brush of footsteps with no rhythm, no author. The gentle complaint of a door in a room I had secured. The whisper of heavy cloth against a wall. I listened until my own heartbeat was a drum of terror in my ears, trying to untangle the real from the imagined. Every sound was a question. Every silence was an answer I did not want to hear. By dawn, I had built a fortress of denial. It was stress, I told myself, the loneliness of a foreign place. I was steeped in the sorrows of a brutal history. Of course, my mind would paint the shadows with its own fears. I would ignore it. I would work. This resolution held until precisely 3 o'clock that afternoon. This time, I was waiting. I sat in the main room, my laptop sleeping, my senses sharp. I would be a scientist of my own haunting. And at 3, as if summoned, the cold bloomed again in the air. It began as a whisper against my spine, then spread like a stain of frost, that impossible, personal winter that clung only to me. He appeared in the same space, by the door, and began the same journey. The dark coat, the measured pace, the profound silence. But this time, I saw more. Fear had blurred the edges before. Now I saw his face. It was hollowed, etched with lines not of age, but of a sorrow so deep it had carved itself into his flesh. His eyes were fixed ahead, not seeing the room, but seeing the path, a path he knew by heart, a path that was the only thing left of him. And then, as he reached the edge of my sight, he stopped. He turned his head, slowly, deliberately, and he looked at me. His eyes, they did not hold malice or anger. They held the crushing weight of ages, an exhaustion so profound it was a physical force. It was the weariness of a soul that had been walking the same steps for longer than mountains had stood. As his gaze met mine, the cold deepened until my bones ached with it, and a current passed between us. It was not a message. It was recognition. He knew I saw him, And I knew, with a certainty that lived beneath all thought, that I was not the first. He held my gaze for a moment that stretched into a small eternity. Then he turned and continued his silent walk into nothingness. He left behind a new lacework of cracks in the tiles, new symbols I did not know. When the warmth returned, I was trembling, not from the cold, but from a deeper shudder, the terror of realizing the map of the world you hold is a child's drawing of an abyss. I took pictures of the new cracks. I spent the afternoon lost in the digital archives of colonial history. The symbols were merchant codes, yes, but they were warnings. They marked disputed routes, territories of uncertain authority, places where the law of men was a fading whisper. They were marks for places where one could simply vanish. The fortress of my skepticism was crumbling, turning to dust before a quiet and certain dread. Something was speaking to me in a language of cold and broken tile. That evening, I walked out into the city, seeking the balm of ordinary life. The streets of the old quarter were alive, a vibrant tapestry of vendors and laughter and children chasing balls across ancient plazas. The city pulsed, bathed in a golden Caribbean light that seemed to burn away all shadows. At a small cafe, an old man with eyes like dark, polished stones served me coffee that tasted of the earth. When I spoke the name of my street, his expression stilled. He looked at me with a soft, sorrowful curiosity, the way one looks at a man standing too close to a cliff's edge. "Have you noticed anything?" he asked, his voice a dry rustle. "Anything out of the ordinary?" The question was a bridge. I could have turned back. Instead, I crossed it. I told him of the cold, of the silent walker, of the weeping cracks in the floor. He simply nodded, as if I were describing the predictable phases of the moon. And then he told me of Don Eduardo Herrera, a merchant of the 1740s who had lived and breathed in that very house. A man who built a kingdom of wealth on the Caribbean trade. But his success was paid for in a currency of compromise. He made pacts with powers that lived in the margins of maps, authorities who dealt in shadow and silence. He was made to walk certain paths, to see only what he was meant to see, to forget the rest. The old man's story did not end with a peaceful death. It ended with a journey that never found its conclusion. It ended with a man who could not stop walking. I thanked him for the coffee and the story, as if they were the same. But as I walked back through the deepening twilight, his words were soft footsteps just behind me. That night, my dreams were of trade routes that navigated not oceans, but sorrows, of merchants who bartered in more than spices and gold, of debts that could not be paid in a single lifetime. I awoke with the absolute, bone-deep certainty that I was being watched. I turned on the light, but the room was empty. There was only the faint, lingering scent of salt and old wool. The next afternoon at 3, I waited like a scholar before a great unveiling. I was ready. My camera was in my hand, my notebook open. The cold came, punctual as a tide, and so did he. But he was not alone. Behind him, in a silent, single file, walked 2 others. The first wore Herrera's timeless coat. The second was a man of the early 19th century. The third, a man in a suit from the lost elegance of the 1920s. Each an echo from a different time, yet all walking the same path, with the same soulless precision, their invisible feet leaving their own testament of cracks upon the floor. The cold was no longer sphere around me. It was the room. It was the air I was breathing, thick and sharp and painful, like inhaling powdered glass. At the edge of my vision, where they always vanished, the procession stopped, and all three turned to look at me. The same exhausted recognition, now threefold. They were not just tired, they were submerged in it, drowning in the endless ocean of their repetition. They were prisoners of a path, and the world was cracking beneath their feet. The youngest of them, the man in the suit, opened his mouth. No sound came out, but I heard him. The knowledge did not come through my ears, but bloomed, fully formed, in the center of my mind. They were not the dead, they were the lost. Still living, still walking, still trying to finish a journey begun 300 years before. A journey that would stretch for 300 more. The house was not a home for ghosts. It was a waypoint, a toll booth on a road that runs parallel to our own, a road that only sometimes touches the world we see, and I was being asked to join their walk. With this understanding came other things, a flood of terrible truths I could not unknow. The path was not confined to this house. It was a web of sorrow spun across the colonial world, connecting every port, every office, every dark room where business was done outside the gaze of law. Every day at 3 o'clock, in 100 quiet places, they walked. They carried cargo that had no name and served masters who paid in whispers and years. The invitation was not a request. My being there, my ability to see them, my having witnessed the passage 3 times, I had been chosen. I was to be inducted into a commerce that predated nations and would outlast them. The cracks in the floor were not a warning. They were a map. And I was being taught the route. The 3 figures waited. Their patience was as deep as the sea. The cold was a physical pressure now, a hand against my chest, making each breath a choice. Time had come undone. A second was a minute, was an hour. I could feel my own solid self beginning to dissolve, my skepticism, my precious armor, melting away. Not by force, but by the gentle, irrefutable pressure of the truth. This is how it happens. You see them, then you understand them, then you become them. You take the first step, and you never ever stop. I closed my eyes. I counted my breaths, 1 to 10. In that small darkness, I made a choice. The world I knew, safe and small and full of lies, or the one that was real, vast and cold and eternal. When I opened them, they were gone. The room was warm. The tiles were whole. But the knowledge was still there, a tiny, cold seed planted in my mind. I packed my life into a single bag that night. I was gone from Cartagena by morning, my lease not yet halfway done. The woman from the agency sounded unsurprised. She did not ask why. I am back in my office now. The fluorescent lights are a sterile comfort, burning away the shadows. My research is finished, pulled from the safe, clean world of digital files. I never went back. I never walk on cobblestone streets where the afternoon light dies too soon. But every day, as the clock nears 3, a phantom chill traces my spine. I find my gaze drifting downward, searching for fractures in the floor. The knowledge they gave me has not gone. It grows, a quiet vine within me. I know now my departure was not an escape. It was a deferral. The invitation has no expiration date. The root is still there, a secret circulatory system running through the veins of the world. And in a yellow house in Cartagena, the tiles continue to crack, charting a journey no one should ever have to take. I tell myself it was a dream. I tell myself it was history. breathing on the back of my neck. I cling to my rational world, my comfortable disbelief in things that cannot be measured. But in the quiet hours, when the night is deep and the world feels thin, I remember the weight in their eyes. And I ask myself how much longer I can pretend not to know the truth. The tiles in my own bathroom, they have begun to show fine, spidery lines. There is no pattern to them. Not yet. I have stopped looking too closely. Some paths, once you see them, are impossible to ignore forever. They simply wait for your feet. Story 2. The earth was breathing a coldness against my skin. I should have known then, when my fingers first met the clay, that this was not a place of warmth. A peculiar chill, a deep and patient cold, radiated from the hill, as if from a subterranean lung. But the road had been a long gray ribbon behind me, 3 hours unspooling into the Appalachian foothills, and a quiet pride had led me here, to the place they whispered was the devil's backbone. It rose from the forest like a shard of bone, a cliff of reddish clay bleeding into the sky. The morning mist was a white lung, breathing a deep and settled quiet over the tree line. The silence was not empty. It was a listening thing. No bird called out. No insect hummed its tiny song. There was only the soft sigh of my boots on the shifting earth as I began to climb. Each step a small prayer that sent dust like rust-colored memories spiraling into the fog below. I had been ascending for what felt like a lifetime, perhaps only 20 minutes when the feeling began. A needle prick of awareness, stitching itself between my shoulder blades. The certain knowledge that I was not alone. I paused, my chest pressed to the cliff's cool face, and allowed my gaze to drift downward. There was nothing. Only the slow, swirling sea of mist that had swallowed the path I had walked, erasing my way back to the world. My fingers found a hold, a small crack in the weeping clay, and I pulled my body upward. Here, the earth felt different, a texture like grit, like fine, dark sand woven into the red. I brought my hand close and saw them, tiny black whispers of something that had been unmade, small, organic fragments of a life long since past. The wind rose then, a soft breath carrying a scent I could not name. It was sharp and metallic, like old pennies sleeping under rain. A scent from the shadowed corners of childhood, a half-forgotten thing that made a knot of quiet dread tighten in my stomach. Halfway to the sky, the feeling of being seen grew into a quiet pressure. My skin felt porous, as if unseen eyes were drinking me in, measuring my breath, my fear, my worth for some purpose I could not comprehend. I tried to focus on the climb, on the cold earth, but my vision swam at the edges with movement. Shadows that breathed when they should have been still. Shapes that dissolved into mist the moment I turned to truly see them. The clay grew treacherous, surrendering its form at my touch. Chunks of it would sigh and fall away, and I learned to test each hold, a soft communion with the earth before trusting it with my weight. A sheen of sweat, cold as the air, beaded on my brow. My breathing was a ragged rhythm against the cliff's silence. The watching presence was no longer distant. It was intimate now. So close, I felt it might be breathing the air just behind my ear. Its curiosity, a tangible weight. I was a breath away from the summit, perhaps 30 feet of vertical earth, when it happened. My left foot found no purchase, and with a soft crumble, the world gave way. A cascade of clay whispered into the mist. My right hand, reaching for a hold that was not there, found only air, for a heartbeat of pure suspension over the white throat of the world. I hung by the strength of my fingers alone. The gravity of my own life, my gear, pulled me backward into the long fall that would unmake me. And then I felt it. A palm, firm and solid, pressed against the center of my back. The touch was not a shove, but a deep, knowing pressure. It was human, impossibly warm, and it held me against the cliff, a steadying force that allowed my mind to find its way back to my body. I scrabbled for new holds, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, and found purchase. I pulled myself onto a more solid ledge and twisted around, a thank you already on my lips for the climber who must have been there. There was only the air, empty and vast and dizzying. No ropes, no gear, no sign that another soul had shared that space with me. The warmth of the hand was a ghost on my back, a memory already fading into the impossible cold. My own hands trembled as I clung to the rock, trying to knit the moment back into the fabric of reality. The palm had been real. I could still feel the echo of its pressure, the phantom warmth it had left behind. But it could not have been. No one could have stood on that sheer face without a single rope, without a single sound. The wind returned, stronger this time, and it carried a sound that turned my blood to ice. The soft, deliberate scrape of boots on stone, coming from directly above my head. Someone was on the cliff face, just out of my sight. They were descending, their steps measured and calm, as if coming down to greet me. A new kind of fear, colder and quieter than before, drove me upward. The footsteps continued, a constant, eerie companion just beyond my view. They kept my pace with a perfect, unnerving precision. When I rested, they rested. When I climbed, they climbed. A terrible, silent dance on a vertical stage. The last 20 feet were a frantic prayer. The clay here was like dust, dissolving at the lightest touch. I moved in desperate, breathless bursts, relying on a momentum born of sheer terror. The footsteps above had ceased, but the feeling of being watched was now a suffocating blanket. When I finally pulled myself over the lip of the summit, my body surrendered. My legs gave way to the trembling, to the exhaustion, and I fell onto my back, into a silence so heavy it felt like water. I lay there, watching the soft, gray canvas of the sky, listening to the wild thing that was my own heart. Eventually, the world returned. I rolled onto my stomach and pushed myself to my feet. The summit was a small, lonely place. 20 feet of sparse grass and a few trees, gnarled and stunted as if from a long sorrow. But it was the tracks that stole my breath. There, pressed into the damp earth, were boot prints. So clear, so fresh, they might have been made a moment ago. The tread was military, a distinctive pattern. Size 11, perhaps 12. They started from nothing, 10 feet from where I'd climbed up, as if their owner had been born of the mist itself. They led in a straight, unwavering line toward the other side of the summit. I followed them. A soft tingling, a premonition, crawled across my scalp. The prints were perfect wounds in the soil, untouched by wind or time. Each one was deep, precise, made by a great weight, of gear perhaps, or of something heavier. My confusion deepened as I traced their path. They led not to a gentle slope, but to the sheer, yawning drop on the far side. And there, at the very precipice, they stopped. I crept toward the edge, a vertigo of the soul churning within me, and I peered down. The cliff below was a sheer, unforgiving wall. There was no ledge, no foothold, no place for a living thing to stand. And yet, the final boot print was positioned precisely at the rim. The toe of the boot extended slightly over the edge, as if its owner had been standing on the very air. The thought fell on me like a stone. No human could have made that last print. It was a posture of impossibility, a defiance of the gentle laws that hold our world together. And still, there it was, as clear as the dread in my own heart. I stumbled back from the edge, my mind a sea of impossible things, the warm palm on my back, the silent, mirroring footsteps, the tracks that ended in the sky. It all pointed to a presence that should not be, could not be, but had saved my life. And then I saw the other things, little prayers of rust and decay, half buried in the soil around the prints. I knelt, my fingers brushing the earth from a tarnished brass button. It bore the insignia of a military unit I did not know. The metal was cold, a deep and penetrating cold that seemed to hum against my skin. Near the button, other whispers of the past. A shred of rotted olive-drab fabric, a corroded buckle from a web of military gear, and then the dog tags. They were so weathered, the letters were faint ghosts on the metal. I could only read fragments. PFC, 1952, missing. The year, 1952. A lifetime ago. If these belonged to the owner of the prints, then the man who pushed me to safety had been a ghost for 70 years. I sat back on my heels, the silence of the summit pressing in. A part of my mind, the loud, rational part, screamed for another story. A trick of the mind, a waking dream born of altitude and fear. But the evidence was here, in my hand, a cold, metal truth. The wind rose again, a long, mournful sigh that sounded almost like voices, and carried within it a sound that froze the marrow in my bones. The soft jingle of a soldier's gear, the creak of old leather, the measured cadence of boots on stone. I spun around, my eyes searching the empty summit. But there was nothing. Only the impossible tracks and the sleeping artifacts. Yet the feeling of being watched was back, stronger now, as if my discovery of the tags had been an invitation, a soft knock on a door that had been waiting patiently to be opened. The temperature began to fall. My breath bloomed as white mist in the air. Around the boot prints, the grass began to shimmer with a delicate frost. In the mild afternoon, a supernatural winter was being born. Its cold emanating from the tracks themselves, spreading outward, making the earth crackle and pop as its moisture turned to crystal. I tried to step away, to retreat from this impossible cold, but something held me. The air itself had become solid, pressing against me with the same firm, gentle pressure I had felt on the cliff. I was caught between the bloom of frost and an invisible wall, a wall that felt like the palm of a giant, sleeping hand. And then I saw him, not with my eyes, not truly. He was a flicker at the edge of sight, a warp in the air where the world seemed thinner, a shadow that held more substance than the light around it. He stood at the place where the boot prints ended, his form wavering like heat rising from a road, neither fully there nor entirely gone. What I could see suggested a young man in the fatigues of a bygone era, but the details were shy, blurring whenever I tried to hold them in my gaze. He was watching me. I knew, with a certainty that was not my own, that he had been watching me all along, long before I'd even begun my climb. He had been measuring me, testing me for a purpose I was only just beginning to feel. The hand that saved me was no accident. It was a choice. a deliberate act by a guardian who had decided I should live. But why? What had I done to earn this spectral protection? Or was I just the next name on a list, a long line of climbers he had chosen to help, a roster stretching back 70 years to the day a tragedy first anchored him to this lonely place? The questions were a flock of dark birds in my mind, their wings beating against the inside of my skull. Because if he was real, if this was the spirit of a dead soldier, then what was he still guarding? What secret kept him here, on this windy precipice, so long after his war had ended? The wind fell away. The silence that replaced it was so absolute, it was a pressure against my eardrums. And in that perfect stillness, I heard a sound that nearly stopped my heart. The soft whisper of my own name, spoken in a voice like distant radio static. He knew me. He had been waiting. For me. The realization was a physical blow, and my knees gave way. This was not a chance meeting. This was an appointment. One I had kept without ever knowing it was made, simply by choosing to climb this hill on this day. But who had made it, and for what reason? The shadow figure moved. He took a single step, a step that should have sent him falling into the endless sky. Instead, it brought him closer to where I knelt among his scattered memories. His form seemed to gather itself, to solidify, just enough for me to see the details that made my heart race. The same insignia from the button, the same unit markings as the dog tags, and his face. When the shimmering air allowed me a moment of clarity, his face held an expression of loneliness so profound it stole the breath from my lungs. This was not a monster. This was a boy who had died 1,000 miles from home, who had been standing his post on this forgotten cliff for 7 decades, waiting for someone to finally understand what he was protecting. Me. The knowledge was not a thought. It was a slow, quiet dawn in my mind, a key turning in a lock I never knew my soul possessed. I was the one he had been waiting for, the one who would see past the impossibility of his being and recognize the truth he held. But what was it? What secret demanded a 70-year vigil? The answer did not come in words. It came as a slow lifting of a fog in my own mind. The artifacts were not just debris. They were a story, left for someone who knew the language. The date on the tags, 1952. The Korean War was a wound on the world then, a time when young men vanished into mountains on the other side of the globe. But this was Appalachia, not Korea. What was a soldier doing here? Unless... The pieces began to drift together, forming a picture of quiet horror, the local whispers I had always dismissed as folklore. Stories of government experiments deep in the hills. Rumors of projects that went wrong, buried in haste and secrecy. I had thought them tales to pass the long winters. But what if they were true? What if something happened here in 1952? Something so awful it had to be hidden forever. And what if this young soldier, this boy, had been ordered to guard it? To make sure that what was buried here stayed buried. The shadow figure gave a slow, tired nod, as if hearing my thoughts. His form was more solid now. I could see the exhaustion in the line of his shoulders, the terrible weight of 70 years of duty. He had kept his promise. He had stood his watch, but he was tired. He was ready to be relieved, ready to pass the burden to another, someone who could hold the knowledge without breaking, someone who could be trusted to keep the watch, even if it meant giving up the dream of a normal life, even if it meant living with a truth that could never be spoken. I wanted to say no. Every sane part of me wanted to run from this place, from this ghost and his impossible burden. But deep in my bones, I felt the truth of it. I felt the weight of secrets that must be kept. And in the quiet chaos of my mind, I understood that the choice had already been made. It was made the moment I decided to come here, to this specific cliff, on this specific day. The wind returned with a sound like far-off thunder. When it fell quiet again, I was alone. The shadow was gone. All that remained were the boot prints and the scattered pieces of his life. But I could feel his presence still. Not gone, but passed on, settled into my own awareness, a silent passenger for a very long journey. With hands that barely trembled, I gathered the artifacts. I wrapped them in a spare shirt and placed them gently in my pack. Evidence of what? I no longer knew. Evidence of a thing that must not be known, something that needed a guardian. The descent took twice as long, not because the climb was hard, but because I kept stopping to look back at the summit, my eyes searching the sparse trees. I saw nothing, but I felt his eyes on me, no longer watching, but grateful. The feeling stayed with me, a quiet hum beneath the noise of the engine on the long drive home. That was 3 months ago. I have been back to Devil's Backbone 17 times. I go alone, and I always bring the artifacts with me. I tell people I am studying the local geology, researching erosion patterns. It is a simple lie, and something in my eyes now makes them believe it. I have learned things in my visits. They come to me in dreams that feel more real than my waking life, in quiet conversations with figures made of mist and memory. The soldier's name was David Kowalski. He was 19 when he died, guarding something that should never have been born. The project was called Operation Midnight Garden. There are no records. The people involved were sworn to a silence deeper than the grave. But not all of them kept it. Sometimes, on nights when the fog is thick on the summit, others join me. They are old men, mostly, their faces etched with the maps of secrets they have carried for a lifetime. They stand around the weathered boot prints, and they whisper. They speak of things that were pushed past the edge of knowing, into places humanity was not meant to go. They confirm what I already know in my heart. My meeting with David Kowalski was just the beginning. There are other places like this one, hidden in these mountains. Other guardians, keeping their own silent watch. A network of souls, bound by a terrible duty, each one chosen, not by chance, but for a quiet strength they did not know they had. Keepers of truths that could undo the world. I have stopped wondering if I am sane. The question is a luxury I cannot afford. What is real is the knowledge that some things are more important than peace of mind, more important than the comfortable lie of the world we think we know. David Kowalski knew that. He proved it for 70 years. Now it is my turn. The boot prints are still there, frozen in that impossible moment. But they are fainter now, with every visit, as if his long duty is finally, peacefully, ending. Soon, they will be gone, faded back into the earth, leaving only the knowledge of what sleeps below and the quiet certainty that it must never be woken. I have made my peace with this. Some guardians are made by fate, others by chance, and some, like me, are chosen by the grateful dead, who can at last go to their rest. The question that walks with me in my dreams is not about sanity or ghosts. It is simpler and colder, and it follows me into the day. The boot prints are almost gone. His duty is almost done. If I die tomorrow, who will David Kowalski choose to take my place? And what will they have to lose to be found? Story 3. It began with a sound, as all hauntings do. Not a whisper, not a creak, but a bloom of laughter. This was 3 weeks after the scent of fresh paint had faded from the house on a street named for the gentle elm. Every afternoon, just as the sun would begin to bleed across the sky, at that quiet moment of 3:47 p.m., the sound would spill over the old brick wall. It was a silver, chiming sound, the kind of breathless giggle that should belong to sunlight and scraped knees. But it was this innocence that held the terror, for I knew, with a certainty that lived deeper than bone, that the lot next door was a hollow, empty space. The woman who sold me the keys had spoken of it. A forgotten place, she'd called it. Nearly 20 years it had been since the Riverside Children's Home was pulled down, a scar left on the earth after a sickness of whispers and scandal. Now, all that remained was a meadow of wild grass, the rusted iron bones of a foundation, and the delicate skeletons of swings, all sleeping behind that tall, tired wall, crowned with a thorn of wire. At first, I tried to weave a story for it. The wind, perhaps, playing tricks with the air. Or children from another street, finding a secret kingdom in the weeds. But the sound was too loyal. It arrived each day with the soft chime of a clock you cannot see, and its nature would shift, a strange and fluid thing. Some days it felt so near, a breath of warmth just behind my ear. On others, it was a distant echo, as if bubbling up from deep within the soil, a sound muffled by a weight of earth and forgotten time. It never stayed long enough to be caught. The moment my hand would reach for my phone, the moment my feet would carry me toward the wall, it would dissolve. A sigh of sound into silence, leaving only the drone of a passing car, the hum of a neighbor's mower, the rustle of autumn leaves in the ancient oaks. By the 4th week, a ritual had taken root in me. At 3:45 each afternoon, a silent pull would draw me to the kitchen window, the one that looked out upon my small yard and the great brick wall. I would stand there, a warm mug cradled in my hands, a silent watcher in a sunlit home. My work, a quiet communion with lines of code, allowed for this small, creeping obsession. It was only a curiosity, I told myself, a little puzzle woven into the fabric of the afternoon. The day I finally crossed the grass was warm, a strange, misplaced warmth for October. 3:47 had arrived, and with it, the chorus of laughter. But today, it did not fade. It lingered, a bright, sharp sound that seemed to dance and rebound against the unseen ruins next door, an echo that set a tremble in my teeth. I left my laptop sleeping and stepped into the air. It was thick, holding the sweet, sad scent of decay, of leaves returning to the earth, and something else, a faint metallic tang, like old blood or wet clay. My yard, once a small pocket of peace with its careful beds of flowers, felt suddenly like a stage. A pressure settled on my shoulders, the weight of a gaze I could not meet. The laughter was a thread, pulling me forward. I walked toward the wall, my steps a whisper on the lawn I had tended only 2 days before. It was a tall wall, 8 feet of weathered brick, a cliff I could not scale. But near its base, time had worried a brick loose. leaving a small, dark mouth in the mortar. I knelt, the damp earth cool against my knees, and pressed my eye to the opening. My breath stilled. The lot was not empty. Dotted across the sea of grass were wounds in the earth, dozens of them, each a perfect sunken rectangle. They were laid in ordered rows, a garden of shallow sorrows. They were not for flowers. The size, the careful spacing, the way the soil had settled, as if tucking in a final blanket. They were graves, small graves, and weaving between them, pressed into the soft soil, were footprints, the perfect, delicate impressions of a child's bare feet. They traced a winding path, a ghostly game of hopscotch played between the sleeping mounds. I pulled back from the wall, a tremor in my hand. My heart was a frantic bird against my ribs. The laughter was gone. The silence that rushed in to take its place was absolute, a heavy, listening stillness. I rose on unsteady legs, brushing the dark soil from my jeans, my mind a frantic scramble for reason. It was drainage, I thought, or the settling of old foundations. It had to be. But the lie was thin and brittle. The order was too perfect. And the footprints, they were so new, so sharp, they held the ghost of a footstep taken only moments before. The rest of the day was lost to the cold blue light of a screen. I searched for the Riverside Children's Home, and what I found in the digital dust of old newspapers turned the coffee in my stomach to ice. The home had been closed, yes, in 2003. The words were soft, careful, chosen by lawyers. Irregularities in record keeping, concerns about resident care. But between the lines, a darker story breathed. Children had vanished over the years. They were called runaways. They were called transfers. But the books were a tangled mess. Some children, it seemed, had simply dissolved from the pages of official memory. The coldest whisper came from a former worker, a voice without a name, speaking to a reporter. They said, when a child was sick, they were sent to the infirmary. But there was no infirmary. There was only the cellar and the back garden, where no one was ever supposed to play. I closed the laptop as the sun surrendered to the evening. My hands were not my own. They trembled with a life of their own. Outside, the world was sinking into twilight, that soft gray hour when the familiar world puts on a stranger's face. I tried to stay away from the kitchen window, but hunger is a primal thing, and as I reached for the refrigerator door, I saw them. More footprints. But these were in my garden. They began at the wall, a perfect, silent trail leading directly to my house. The small bare feet had somehow climbed an 8-foot wall, scaled a crown of rusted wire, and landed without a sound, all while I sat inside, blind and deaf. But this is the part that unraveled me. The footprints stopped. They ended precisely 6 feet from my back door. They did not turn back. They did not circle the house. They simply ceased, as if the walker had been gently lifted into the air and spirited away. With a flashlight, I knelt to look closer. The impressions were deep, real, holding the elegant arch of an instep, the soft pads of toes. But as I traced them from the wall, a quiet impossibility revealed itself. With every step taken toward my home, the footprints became fainter, lighter. By the time they reached that 6-foot line, they were mere suggestions, the barest whisper of a presence in the soil. And beyond that line, there was nothing. Not a single blade of grass was bent. Standing there, in the deepening dark, the beam of my flashlight shaking, I felt it again. the weight of being watched. It was a physical thing, a pressure in the air, a crawling on the skin. I turned, sweeping the light across the silent yard, the dark wall, the blind windows of my own house. There was nothing, but the feeling was a chorus, a certainty that I was being seen from all directions at once. I hurried inside. I turned the lock. That night, sleep was a shore I could not reach. Every sound was magnified, the old house groaning in its bones, a branch, a bony finger scraping at the roof. But beneath these familiar murmurs, there was another sound, a soft, shuffling footfall on the hardwood floors. The gentle sigh of a stair tread bearing a weight that wasn't mine. It could have been the house settling in the autumn chill. But my mind, now a fertile ground for fear, heard someone, something, moving through the sleeping rooms below. The next morning, I called the city. I needed an anchor, an official word to tether me to the world I thought I knew. The woman on the phone was kind, her voice a placid hum. But my questions seemed to be stones dropped into a still pond. Riverside Children's Home? A pause. The soft click of a keyboard. I'm sorry, I don't see any record of a facility by that name. I gave her the address, described the lot. More typing. A longer silence. Sir, she said, her voice now holding a note of gentle confusion. Our records show that lot has been empty since 1987. It was zoned for development, but the soil was unsuitable. There's no record of any institution ever being there. After I hung up, the newspaper articles I had found felt like a dream I was struggling to recall. Had I read of missing children and shallow graves? Or had my own fear whispered those words into the empty spaces? But the footprints were real. I looked. They were still there, a silent, fading path to an invisible line. The laughter came again. 3:47 p.m. This time, I was ready. My phone was in my hand. My shoes were by the door. I had a plan. But as the sound began, a sweet, silver chime on the air, I was paralyzed at my kitchen window. Because this time, I could see them. Through the small, dark mouth in the wall, in the long afternoon shadows, shapes were moving. Small, shimmering figures, translucent as the heat rising from summer asphalt. They were playing a silent, joyful game among the sunken graves. I watched, my phone a dead weight in my hand, as one of the figures drifted closer to the wall. It was the size of a child, dressed in something simple, timeless. A little dress, perhaps, that flowed and eddied as if underwater. As it neared the gap where I knelt, a secret observer, I saw its face. Or rather, where its face should have been. There was only a smooth, blank, featureless expanse, like a sculpture waiting for the artist's hand. And yet, I knew, with a certainty that froze my blood, that it was looking at me. That blankness was tilted in a gesture of gentle curiosity. We held each other's gaze through that crack in the wall. The living and the... what? A memory? A dream? A stain of sorrow on the air? Then it lifted a small, shimmering hand and pressed it to the brick, directly over the opening. On my side, a sudden, piercing cold bloomed against my cheek. My breath turned to a white mist in the warm air. Frost, delicate and intricate as a fern, began to creep across the mortar around the hole. I scrambled backward. My phone slipped from my numb fingers, its screen shattering against the stone patio. The laughter ended, not faded, but cut, as if by a knife. The silence that followed was so deep it rang in my ears. And in that silence, I heard a new sound, a soft, dry scratching, like a fingernail being drawn slowly across stone. It was coming from inside my house. I turned, and there, on the glass of my back door, were handprints, dozens of them, small and overlapping, glistening and new. They covered the pane from top to bottom, some so high a child could never reach. But I was outside, looking in. The prints were on the inside of the glass. Whatever had made them was already in my home. The scratching continued, a thin, sharp sound that traveled. It moved through the house, from the kitchen, through the living room, and then up the stairs, into my bedroom where the laptop sat, holding the history of a place the city said had never been. Standing in my own backyard as the day began to die, I knew I had a choice. Go inside and face the impossible thing that was now there, or run. Leave the key in the lock and never look back. But as I stood, frozen, I saw it. The footprints, the ones that ended 6 feet from my door. They were moving. New impressions were appearing in the earth, one by one. A slow, deliberate procession, closing the distance between their world and mine. An invisible thing was walking toward me. I ran. I fumbled with the key, my hand a stranger to me. As the lock turned, I felt a presence at my back, a coldness that was not the evening air. As I fell through the door and slammed it shut, I would have sworn I felt a breath, colder than winter, on the nape of my neck. The scratching had stopped. The house was silent, but it was a different silence now. The air was heavy, charged with a strange new energy that made it difficult to breathe. Every shadow seemed to harbor a secret. I moved through my own home like an intruder. In my bedroom, the laptop screen was a soft, glowing portal. The articles were still there, but the words had changed. Where I remembered reading of scandal, I now saw stories of a successful home, closed due to a lack of funding. The quote about the seller was gone, replaced by a warm testimonial from a grateful orphan. I hit refresh. The story changed again. Now it was a minor tragedy, a fire, but all the children had been safely evacuated. Each time I refreshed the page, the history of the lot next door rewrote itself, the truth a fluid, shapeless thing. I closed the laptop. Stress, I told myself. Lack of sleep. But then I heard it, the laughter. It was inside the house, with me. It drifted down from upstairs, from my own bedroom. The same sweet, chiming sound, but now it was a poison in the air. It was joined by other sounds, the soft patter of small feet on the hardwood floor, the gentle creak of a board settling under a light, restless weight. I stood in my living room, a statue of fear, and listened as invisible children explored the rooms above my head. I heard their whispers, a language I could not understand, but knew was the language of play. In a desperate grasp for sanity, I checked the carbon monoxide detectors. They were green. I tried my phone. It had a signal. But who do you call? How do you explain that you are being haunted by the ghosts of children who may never have been real? As night fell, a deep, moonless October dark, the sounds grew bolder. Furniture seemed to slide across the floorboards above. Drawers opened and closed. A soft thud, as if a small body had jumped from my bed to the floor. When I finally found the courage to climb the stairs, my bedroom was pristine, untouched. The bed was made. The laptop was closed. But the air was freezing, my breath a cloud before my face. And there, on my pillow, was an indentation. The perfect, unmistakable impression of a small head. I spent that night in a chair downstairs, bathed in the sterile glare of every light I owned. The sounds continued until dawn. Footsteps, laughter, the slow creak of a door swinging open in a dark room. I did not move. I had learned that to look for the source was to look into the abyss. By morning, my fear had worn itself into a dull, quiet ache of acceptance. Whatever was here, it did not seem to wish me harm. It only wished to be known. From the kitchen window, I saw that the footprints in the yard had multiplied. They covered the lawn in intricate swirling patterns, like a strange, ephemeral crop circle. They all led to the wall, and they all began there. And as I watched, sipping coffee that tasted of nothing, new footprints began to appear in the soft earth, one by one. Invisible feet walking in slow, patient circles. At 3:47 p.m., the laughter came. I did not jump. I had been waiting for it. I walked outside, across my wounded lawn, and knelt at the gap in the wall. I could see them clearly now. Dozens of them drifting through the tall grass, their blank faces turned toward me. They seemed to represent different times. Some wore the simple smocks of a forgotten era. Others were in clothes I recognized from my own childhood. There was a quiet joy in their movements, a gentleness that was both beautiful and profoundly sad. They seemed to be showing me something, gesturing from the sunken earth to my house and back again. One of them knelt by the gap, its smooth face inches from my own. And then it spoke, not with a voice, but inside my mind, a thought that was not mine. We've been waiting. The words were a physical blow. I stumbled back, but the voice followed me, a gentle, persistent echo in my skull. So long, but you can see us. Now you can help. I fled to my house, but there was no escape. The voice was inside me now. The others, they ran. Or they pretended not to see. But you kept looking. You are different. I slammed the door, my back pressed against it, my heart a frantic drum. We need someone to remember, the voice pleaded. The truth gets lost. The paper changes. But the earth remembers. The ground holds our stories. I tried to write it down to anchor it in reality, but on the screen of my laptop, the words I typed vanished as soon as my fingers left the keys. Not that way, the voice whispered. Come, see. And I did. A gentle, irresistible pull drew me back out into the fading light. The lot next door was transforming. The grass glowed with a soft, internal luminescence. The figures were more solid, more real. I knelt at the wall. The small, faceless child was waiting. Look, it said in my mind, and it pointed to the earth. The rectangular depressions began to shift. The soil seemed to melt away, revealing the faint, preserved outlines of small bodies, pressed into the ground like fossils. There were 37 of them. 37, the voice confirmed, a wave of collective sorrow washing through me. We were told we were going to new homes, better places, but we never left the yard. We are still here, still waiting for someone to say our names. What do you want? I whispered, my voice a dry rasp. Tell them, the voice begged. Make them remember we were here, that we mattered. As the last light of the sun vanished, a phantom building rose from the earth. I saw the Riverside Children's home, solid and real, for a fleeting, terrible moment. Then it dissolved into the darkness, leaving only the graves and the small, silent gardeners who tended them. Will you help us? The voice asked, and it was filled with a hope so fragile it broke my heart. I nodded. I did not know how. The proof was like smoke. The records were lies, The footprints vanished in the light of day, but I had to try for the 37th. The laughter began again, but now it was different. It was a sound of relief, of a long-held breath finally released. I still live in the house. My friends whisper that I have retreated from the world, that I have lost myself in a fantasy. They point to the empty lot, the city records, my lack of any proof. But every afternoon, when 3:47 arrives, I know the truth. I see the children playing in their secret garden. And late at night, I hear their soft footsteps in the halls. No longer ghosts, but guests. They are quiet now. They are content to be remembered. The footprints still appear in my yard, a shifting, silent language. Sometimes they spell out names in the dew-kissed soil, names that fade before they can be captured. But I write each one down in a book I keep hidden. 37 names. I don't know if I am a witness or simply a man dreaming a long, dark dream. But when the laughter drifts over the wall, a soft, hopeful sound in the quiet of the evening, I know that some truths don't need to be proven. They only need to be heard. And as long as I am here, someone is listening. Story 4. It begins with the quiet. You should listen for it when you walk in the old places of the world. There is always a sound, a conversation, the wind telling its long, slow stories to the leaves, the gossip of the stream over slick stones, the dry rustle of a beetle's journey. The mountains have a voice, but in that place, the voice had gone away. I was following the pale, bony spine of a river that had forgotten the sea, and the silence was a weight. The air grew thick, like water, and my own steps made no sound, as if the dust itself was swallowing them, holding them close. The light of the afternoon was thin and gold, and it fell in splinters through the canopy above. The great oaks, the ancient maples, they knitted their branches together, hiding the sky. I had come to this place to be alone, to let the noise of my own world fade into the whisper of the wilderness. I walked for hours, my boots pressing into the fine, pale silt. The little screen in my hand, a cold comfort, swore this was a path for people. But the painted marks on the trees had vanished long ago, and a strange, deep humming in my soul told me to go on, further in. I was being drawn, you see, even then. That is when I heard the first sound. Not a whisper, but a crack. It was sharp, like a bone breaking, somewhere in the trees to my left. It echoed in the stillness, a single, sharp note in the profound quiet. I stopped. My heart was a frantic bird in my chest. I searched the deep green shadows between the trunks of the trees, but there was only the still green dark. Nothing. It must have been a branch, I told myself. A dead limb, tired of holding on. A common sound. A simple sound. I began to walk again, but the world had changed. Every part of me was listening now. The silence was no longer empty. It was watching. It pressed on my ears like a soft hand. Then, the sound came again. Another crack. Closer this time. And it was not the careless fall of dead wood. This was the sound of something breaking with intention. My feet began to move faster, a flutter of panic. I tried to smooth into a steady rhythm. I would glance behind me, but the path was always empty, a long, pale ribbon winding back into the growing dark. The sun was sinking, and the shadows were pooling, drinking the last of the light. The third crack was directly above me. I looked up, and I saw the sky through the leaves, and I saw a great oak, its trunk as wide as a bed, leaning toward me. There was no wind, no reason. It simply leaned and fell. There was a long, deep groan from its heartwood, the sound of a giant in pain. I threw myself to the side, my body scraping against the stones, and the tree fell where I had been standing. The world shook, the air filled with the scent of broken earth and ancient, wounded wood. When the dust began to settle, a soft gray snow, I looked at the place where the tree had been. The stump was a perfect flat circle. The wood was pale and healthy. It had not been torn by wind or rot. It had been cut, as if by a blade of impossible size and sharpness. I was pulling myself to my feet, brushing the dirt from my clothes, when the fourth tree fell. I saw it happen. 50 yards down the riverbed, another oak simply gave up its life. It tipped over without a sound of warning, a slow, deliberate curtsy into the dust. And with its fall, a cloud of birds I had not known were there burst from the forest. A frantic storm of wings and screaming that was the first true noise I had heard since the silence began. My mind, the small, frightened part of it, tried to find reasons. A sickness in the roots, a thirst in the earth, a hidden worm. But the rest of me, the still, quiet part that was listening to the mountain, knew better. This was not chaos. This was a language. The fifth tree fell behind me. I turned, and the way back was gone. Another titan of the woods lay across the path, its leaves still trembling. It had fallen to trap me. The thought was so clear, so calm. The trees were not just falling. They were being placed. They were walls in a maze being built around me, and I was being herded, gently, quietly, forward, deeper. My heart was a drum now, a wild, frantic beat against my ribs. A cold dew had formed on my skin. I took out the little screen again. No signal. Of course. But the map, the little blue dot of my life, it was still there. It showed me standing on a trail, a place where people are meant to be. But this was not that place. The sixth tree fell while I was staring at the lifeless screen. And with its fall, I felt something new, a tremor in the soles of my feet. It was a faint, deep hum that came just before the sound of the breaking wood, a vibration that ran through the stone of the riverbed, a signal passing through the bones of the earth. I knelt and I laid my hand flat on the cool, pale stone. I felt it again, a pulse, rhythmic, like something breathing far, far below me, something asleep and stirring. My mind still searched for shelter and logic. An underground river, the shifting of ancient rock, a forgotten mine, groaning in its sleep. But logic was a small, flickering candle, and the darkness was growing. The trees kept falling, each one a quiet, precise punctuation in a story I could not read. They were guiding me. I knew it now. I tried to call out. My voice was a small, foolish thing. The silence took it. It did not echo from the high earthen walls of the riverbed. It was simply gone. The air drank the sound from my lips. The seventh tree fell in front of me. So close I felt the wind of its passing on my face. I stumbled back, and my eyes fell upon the stumps. Each one was the same. A perfect, smooth surgical wound. No splinters, no ragged tear. The wood was parted, not broken, as if something had whispered to the fibers of the tree, and they had simply let go. There were no marks of a saw, no trace of a tool, only the impossible, gentle cut. I could feel the panic, a cold tide rising in my throat. I told myself to breathe, to think. There had to be an answer, a reason. The eighth tree fell, and the sound that came with it was the one I had been waiting for without knowing it. From beneath the ground, a hollow thump, like a footstep. The footstep of something vast, walking in a chamber deep within the earth. The vibration was stronger now. I could feel it in my bones. It was the rhythm of a slow, determined walk. It knew where I was. I remembered the stories my grandfather would tell, his voice a low murmur by the fire. Stories of the things that sleep beneath the mountains. Things older than memory. I had always thought them just stories. But in that place, with the world quietly remaking itself around me, they felt like truths I had forgotten. The 9th tree fell, and as it did, I saw it, a flicker. In the corner of my eye, between the dark trunks of the living trees, something moved. Something large and without light. When I turned my head, it was gone. But the shadows themselves seemed different now. Thicker. They had weight. I was running. Not a hike, not a walk. A clumsy, stumbling run. The fallen trees were hurdles, obstacles in a course designed to push me onward, always deeper into the forest, away from any world I had ever known. Part of me was screaming that I was losing my mind, but the evidence was all around me, in the quiet, patient geometry of the fallen wood. The 10th tree fell as I came to a turn in the riverbed, and with it, a new sound, a low, rolling moan that came not from the tree, but from the ground itself. It was the sound of a great chest filling with air. It was too deep to be an animal, too alive to be the earth. It vibrated inside of me, a note of profound and ancient sorrow. I pressed myself against the cold dirt of the riverbank. The trees I could see now had formed a perfect funnel, leading me to whatever was around this bend. There was no going back. The path was closed. The underground thing was moving with me now, a steady, rhythmic presence beneath my feet, a heartbeat, a breath. I took the last few steps, and I rounded the bend, and I stopped. The world had opened into a circle, a perfect amphitheater carved from the earth. All around its edge, the trees had been laid down, every single one. They lay in perfect lines, their great trunks pointing to the center, like the spokes of a wheel, like the hands of a clock. It was a design, a place of ceremony, built in an afternoon, just for me. The canopy above was so thick that the world below was bathed in a green subaquatic twilight, and in the very center of this place, the ground was moving. It was rising, a dome of earth, swelling upward, cracking the soil. It pulsed with the slow, deep heartbeat from below, and through the cracks I could see something dark, not soil, not stone, something that lived, something that breathed. I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. The fallen trees were a cage of wood and leaves. This was a trap. No, not a trap, a destination. The mound in the center rose higher, and the sound of breathing grew louder, the sound of colossal lungs drawing a slow, patient breath. The dome of earth split open at its peak, and a darkness was born from it. A darkness that was not an absence of light, but a presence, a thing in itself. From that darkness, something came. My mind would not see it. It was a kindness. My eyes looked, but my brain refused the shape of it. I remember only an impression of impossible angles, of a movement that did not obey the laws of bone and muscle. I felt its mind turn to me, an intelligence as old as the stone, as vast as the sky, and I knew. The trees had not been falling to trap me. They had been falling to show me the way, to bring me here. This thing had been sleeping, and it had called me. The movements under the earth had not been a pursuit. They had been a preparation, setting the stage. I stood there in the green twilight, surrounded by the silent, ordered bodies of the trees, and I felt the world I knew begin to break. Whatever this was, it did not live by my rules. It lived in the quiet spaces, in the deep places. As my own mind began to fray, to come apart like old cloth, a final quiet thought floated up through the darkness. I had been walking these mountains my whole life. I knew their paths, their secrets, but I had never seen this place, this perfect, silent circle of fallen trees, which meant one of two things. It had not been here yesterday, or I had never been where I thought I was. The last thing I remember is a feeling, the feeling of something impossibly vast and patient, settling back into the warm dark of the earth. It was content. It had made its presence known, and it was confident that I would carry it with me, a seed of its long dream, back into the world of light. If, of course, I ever found my way back at all. Story 5. There is a sound the light makes in a place like that, a sound like a moth beating its wings inside a jar. It is a low, electric breath that settles deep in your bones, and it hummed just for me in the quiet hours after midnight. The clock on the wall showed 17 minutes past 3. I know this because I was watching the numbers change, each one a small lifetime until the sun returned. Then, a little silver bell above the door sang its tired, lonely note, and the October air, smelling of cold stone and sleeping earth, drifted inside. He came in with it. He looked as though he had been sewn together from road dust and long, sleepless nights. The leather of his coat was a geography of old stains, darker at the collar and cuffs. A history written in something I told myself was only oil. His hair was a damp shadow framing a face made of something older and more patient than skin. But it was his eyes that I remember. They were not looking at me or at the rows of sleeping candy bars. They were looking through me at the space I occupied, as if I were a ghost in my own story. And then, the smell. Beneath the gasoline, there was something else. A faint, sweet, and sorrowful scent, like flowers left too long in a vase, or meat forgotten in the warmth. He moved toward the counter, but there was no sound. His heavy boots, which should have scolded the cheap linoleum with every step, were utterly silent. It was a hole in the world of sound, a missing piece that made the hum of the lights feel deafening. I found myself leaning forward, listening for a footstep that would never arrive, and the silence was a far more dreadful thing than any noise. "I need a lighter," he said. The voice was not a voice. It was a flat line drawn in the air, without the slightest curve of warmth or courtesy one might offer in the deep of the night. It was not a request, but a statement of fact, as if read from a page only he could see. My hand, I noticed, was a distant country from my body as I reached back for the small carousel of lighters. It trembled, a tiny, silent bird. I chose a simple one, blue as a vein. When I turned back to him, the space between us had shrunk. I had not seen him move. The exchange was a quiet ritual. He laid the precise amount on the counter, a small constellation of silver and copper coins. 4 quarters, 2 dimes, 3 pennies. As he took the lighter, our fingers did not meet, yet I felt a warmth pass between us, a spark of static from a world I did not understand. In that moment, the fluorescent light above us stuttered, just once, and the shadows on his face shifted, blurring his features into something ancient and unknowable. He left as he had arrived, a phantom dissolving back into the night. I watched from the window as he walked to a car parked at the very edge of the light's reach. It was a dark sedan, its license plate a secret kept by mud. There was something about its shape, a subtle wrongness in its length, in the way it crouched low to the ground, that made my breath catch. He slipped inside and was gone, pulling away into the darkness without the benediction of headlights. I told myself the story you would tell yourself, that the night shift is a magnet for the strange, that loneliness carves odd shapes out of ordinary men. But a deep, quiet disquiet had settled in me. I checked the door lock again and again, and the sound of every passing car on the highway was the sound of his return. The days that followed were blessedly empty, and the memory of the man with the hollow eyes began to fade, like a dream upon waking. It was on a Thursday evening, with the television murmuring its blue-gray ghost stories in the corner, that everything changed. The voice of the news anchor became a drowsy hum, a sound from far away, as a photograph bloomed on the screen. It was him, the same tired sculpture of a face, the same patient, empty gaze. But this was a photograph taken in the hard light of day, a police photograph that hollowed out his cheeks and made his eyes look like dark, hungry things. Suspected of multiple abductions across 3 states, the anchor's voice whispered. Harold Vance, last seen in the area early Tuesday morning, driving a dark blue sedan. Police consider him extremely dangerous. Do not approach. Early Tuesday morning. I had been working the late hours of Monday, which bleed into the quiet, nameless hours of Tuesday. The remote control was a small, sharp sound in a universe of cotton as it fell from my hand. For a long moment, I thought something would answer it. A soft tread in the hallway, a gentle tapping on my door. But there was only the silence, and it was a silence that was listening. Early Tuesday morning. I had been working the late hours of Monday, which bleed into the quiet, nameless hours of Tuesday. The remote control was a small, sharp sound in a universe of cotton as it fell from my hand. For a long moment, I thought something would answer it. A soft tread in the hallway, a gentle tapping on my door. But there was only the silence, and it was a silence that was listening. I tried to reason it away. The human mind is a flawed instrument, easily tricked by poor lighting and exhaustion. So many faces are alike in their sorrow, but it was a hollow comfort. Deep in the quietest part of myself, where truths sleep, I knew. The man who needed a lighter, who paid an exact change from the bottom of his pocket, was a killer. Sleep became a shore I could no longer reach. Each night I would lie in the dark, and the memory of our meeting would play behind my eyes, a pool of dark water whose reflection always changed. Was it blood on his jacket, and not oil? Had his breath carried a tremor of excitement? The more I searched the memory, the more it frayed and unraveled, slipping through my thoughts like water. I began to see whispers. A dark car, half hidden in the street outside my apartment when I left for the deep of the night. A shape, a suggestion of a man standing where the gas station's light gave way to shadow. And that smell, gasoline and something soft and rotten, would drift to me on the breeze when I walked alone. My manager, Ron, a good man who lived in the daylight, saw the growing shadows under my eyes. He asked if I was all right, and for a moment, I almost told him everything. But how do you cup this dread in your hands and show it to another? How do you explain that you can feel a dead man's gaze on you when you are utterly alone? I spoke of sleeplessness, of a stress that had no name. He suggested I rest, but the thought of being alone in my apartment, with only the listening silence for company, was a terror I could not face. The gas station, with its fleeting ghosts of travelers, felt safer. It was the following Monday during my shift that I found the first small message. I was tending to the cigarettes, arranging them in their neat rows, when I saw it. A piece of paper, folded into a perfect, clean square, nestled between two cartons. On it, in block letters that felt unnervously calm, was my name, Mike. And inside, the same patient hand had written, "You remember me." My own hand began to shake as I read the words. I looked around the empty store, my gaze searching the aisles for a presence that wasn't there. I was alone. The security tapes would show a long, unbroken hour of solitude since my last customer, a weary trucker who had bought only coffee and salted meat. It's a joke, I told myself. A prank from one of the daytime workers, though I could not imagine any of them capable of such a quiet cruelty. I let the note fall into the trash, but my eyes kept returning to it, as if I expected the small white square to crawl back out on its own. 2 nights later, the second one appeared. It was waiting for me under the windshield wiper of my car, a pale moth pressed against the glass. This message was longer. "You saw my face, you know what I am. But you didn't tell. Why?" I sat in my car for a long time after that, with the engine breathing and the doors locked. The parking lot was a stage, set with islands of artificial day and oceans of night. He could have been in any of those shadows, watching me read his words, his patient eyes asking their silent question. That night, I called the police. The officer on the phone was kind, but his voice was full of a weary patience of its own. What crime, he asked, had truly been committed? Leaving notes is not against the law, not unless there is a threat, and these were not threats. They were questions, whispered from a place I could not name. He suggested I buy cameras, or stay with a friend. But I had no friends, not really. The night shift had made an island of me, and my family was a distant constellation, 3 states away. I was alone with this soft, unfolding horror. The third note was on my pillow when I returned from work. My hands grew cold and distant as I stared at it. It was an impossible thing. I had locked the door to my apartment. I always locked the door. The deadbolt was still thrown when I turned my key. The windows were sealed, painted shut years ago by a landlord who cared little for such things. And yet, there it was, placed in the very center of the pillow with a care that felt surgical. It said, "You're starting to understand. The space between what's real and what isn't. I live there now. So do you." I did not sleep that night, or the night after. I sat in a chair in my living room, a baseball bat resting like a dead limb across my lap, and I watched the door. I listened for a sound that did not come. In the dark glass of the window, my reflection was a stranger, a gaunt, haunted thing. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to have followed me home. That same sound of a moth trapped in a jar now filled my silent apartment. By Friday, I was beginning to wonder if my own mind had become the haunted house. Perhaps there were no notes, no dark sedan. Perhaps stress had finally fractured my reality, and I was writing them myself in a dream state I couldn't recall. Perhaps Harold Vance himself was a fiction, a face I'd seen on the news, and woven into a nightmare. And then, on Saturday morning, I found the lighter. It was sitting on my kitchen counter, where no lighter had been before. The same blue Bic I had sold him. I knew it was the same one. There was a faint scratch along its side, a tiny imperfection I had noticed as I plucked it from its display. The lighter was warm, as if it had been held in a hand moments before. I flicked the small wheel, and a flame bloomed into existence. But the flame was wrong. It burned with a cold blue light, and it cast shadows that seemed to sway and dance to a rhythm I could not hear. I set it down, gently, as if it were a sleeping animal that might wake and bite. The walls of the kitchen seemed to breathe with me, closing in. The humming was back, louder now, and it was not coming from any light. It was coming from the lighter itself. That is when I understood. Not with my mind, but with a deeper part of me that had been asleep and was now awake. Harold Vance had never left a note. He'd never broken into my home. The killer was gone, swallowed by the world. But our small, quiet meeting in the hum of the fluorescent lights had left a tear in the fabric of things. And something else had noticed. Something that lives in the soft, quiet spaces between what we know and what we fear, between the sleeping world and the waking one. Something that feeds on the terror of a witness who says nothing. The lighter sat on my counter, its flame a cold blue tear, casting its impossible shadows. And in those shadows, I could see the shape of a man who was not quite there, whose patient eyes were witnessing me from a place that had no name. I know now why he needed it. Not for a cigarette, not for any fire of this world. It was a marker, a small blue tombstone to commemorate the moment our worlds touched. The flame was a beacon, calling to whatever comes after, whatever collects the debts of silence and fear. The news stopped speaking of Harold Vance. He disappeared from the world as quietly as he'd entered my store. But the lighter remains. It burns its cold fire on my kitchen counter. And sometimes, in the deep hours of the night, when the humming is at its loudest, I see a movement in the corner of my eye. A patient silhouette, standing just beyond the edge of what is real, waiting for me to finally look, to finally acknowledge the truth that has come to live with me. I sold a man a flame, and now, in the space between worlds, something has come to watch it burn. The fire grows smaller every day. The shadows it casts grow longer, and I find myself listening in the quiet space between waking and sleeping. For the moment, the light finally dies, and the real darkness can begin.